Hello, my name's Graham Baker and I'm co-portfolio manager of the Global Environment Strategy. And I'm here to give you an update on some of our thinking and research around decarbonisation. I think the key message here is that we believe the transition has barely begun. We have a long way to go as a planet and as a global economy, and the growth opportunities are significant. Now let's start with the risks. And the UN have reminded us once again that climate action failure is a huge risk that we all face. In fact, from their latest risk report, you can see here that climate action failure is the top risk by impact, but also by likelihood, which is scary in itself, but also highlights that we need to act and we need to act quickly. We've also seen from the latest UN interim synthesis report that many regions' pledges and NDCs have not been good enough, i.e. we are seeing an equivalent of 0.5% reduction in emissions from 2010 to 2030, when in fact that needs to be 45%. So as we move towards COP26, we expect to see or hope to see positive news and announcements from many countries around the world. But this highlights the risk of climate change is here. We're seeing the physical risks impacting us on an everyday basis. And as a global economy, we need to do a lot more. In terms of the opportunities, I think it's important to highlight the latest IEA report, which looks at their net zero pathway and highlights that the transition has barely started. Now, if you look at some of the numbers on this slide, you can see that the IEA believe we need to see significant increases in things such as wind and solar and renewable capacity. They have stated we need to see 4 times the increase from where we are today by 2030. They've also stated we need to see 18 times number of electric car sales and 41 times the increase in annual battery production for electric vehicles. Now, all of this needs to come with a focus on sustainable supply chains. And importantly, we need to see significantly more capital spent in many of these areas. The IEA have stated we need to spend over $4 trillion by 2030 if we're to get to net zero. That's going from just under 1 trillion spend over the last few years. So the increase and requirement in capital is significant. If you look at the 2050 numbers, they're even bigger and the multiples are huge. Now, if we believe these numbers to be correct in a net zero scenario, then we think this provides a really exciting long-term, potentially once in a lifetime structural growth opportunity for investors. And I think one of the important points to highlight is that this IEA report only focuses on the energy system. So that is about 2/3 of global carbon emissions. There are other areas that we also need to focus on, and we are focusing on here within the research we're doing for the Global Environment Strategy. And what are some of those areas? Well, as we've touched on before, we're looking at the future of food, factories and buildings at the moment. And something really interesting is the future of food. We all know that agriculture and the food supply chain makes up approximately 20% of global carbon emissions. And we do have exposure to this resource efficiency bucket within the strategy. Names such as Novozymes and Croda have natural-based products that feed into this area and help to decarbonize the food and agriculture supply chain. Novozymes, for example, is a leader in enzymes. It has a 50% market share in enzymes. And an interesting part to this story is that their enzymes are utilized within plant-based and cellular-based meat alternatives, helping to decarbonize the food supply chain. Croda, another name in the portfolio, are a leader in biochems and biosurfactants, helping to replace petrochemicals within many different industries. But one interesting example is the use of their natural-based products to improve crop yields and improve resource efficiency when growing plants for consumption. So we have exposure to this story already within the strategy, but continue to increase the level of research within this area as we've become more and more excited by the exceptional structural growth opportunity. One area where we've carried out significant research is around the decarbonisation of meat. Now, as you can see on this slide, we see almost 20% of global carbon emissions coming from what you could define as growing things, whether that's plants or animals. And I think it's becoming quite clear that agriculture, livestock, and the supply chain is a significant contributor to climate change, and we need to see more happening to decarbonize this area of food and the consumption across the world. Now, a lot of the work we've been carrying out in this area is trying to run different scenarios, looking at the potential for plant-based and cellular-based meat as we move to 2050 and the aim to be net zero by that point. Now, we see the potential for significant growth in plant-based meat because plant-based meat has significantly lower carbon emissions relative to what they are replacing within the meat supply chain. As we see the growth in world population and expect that to continue, we need to feed many billions of more people, and we need to do that in a carbon efficient way. And from some of the work we've been looking at, we expect to see significant growth in the size of that plant-based meat market. So we potentially expect to see that market grow from tens of billions of dollars at the moment to over $300 billion by 2035. Now, that is a long-term view, and that is why we discuss and debate many different scenarios. But to us, it is becoming clearer that this is an area of the global economy that needs to decarbonize aggressively, and we think it offers some really exciting structural growth opportunities for those long-term investors. Hopefully that gives you an insight into some of the work we've been doing within the global environment strategy, and I'll say thank you for listening and goodbye.